Hello there, it's Silver. This is Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden. So this is a pretty cool one. It's an investigation RPG, kind of like I just recently did with the Thaumaturge, although this one is a bit different, a lot more combat focused, and using a very different set of mechanics, but the setting is pretty cool. So this game is actually set in the colonies, as in America before it was America. This is set in, I think, the fictional settlement of New Eden and its surroundings. I'm pretty sure New Eden's not a real place, but it is set in what is a real area. In this case, it's sort of outside of Boston generally. And time-wise, it takes place in 1695, so this is quite some time ago. And you play as a Banisher, technically two Banishers, although one of you is a little bit dead ever since the prologue, and is now a ghost haunting the other one. And strangely, the one that becomes a ghost is not the one whose last name is McWraith. And in this case, a Banisher is a ghost hunter. You are a ghost hunter, a hunter of ghosts, and that's what you do. You solve hauntings. That is your entire shtick, and you've become quite good at it. The idea here is you are Red McWraith, and he is a lovely Scottish man, and his wife/mentor in the arts of being a Banisher, Antea, is along with him, and you are set to figure out what's going on with New Eden, because there seems to be some really dark stuff happening and no one knows what it is. And you find out what that dark stuff is pretty early on, and that dark stuff kills Antea, and she becomes a ghost. Now, this is obviously a bit of a moment of hypocrisy that the character of Red is trying to fight with, because his whole shtick is to get rid of ghosts, and yet his wife is now a ghost that's haunting him, and he doesn't want to get rid of her. So the main plot of the game surrounds actually lifting this curse, the curse of New Eden, figuring out why it's in place in the first place, like what actually happened to make this curse a thing, and also figure out what to do with your wife, and whether you want to allow her to pass on beyond the veil of death, or try and actually bring her back, resurrect her physically. Overall, the game's structure reminds me a lot of The Witcher 1, and that's a very good thing because I really enjoyed that game, although I did only play it when the Enhanced Edition came out. I never played the original Witcher 1 experience. My computer at the time would have combusted just looking at the box. So that means this game is kind of like a semi-open world, very much like the earlier Witcher games. It's not one big contiguous open world, it is a large set of big open areas that are separated by load screens, and each of these open areas has a lot of branches and optional stuff in it, and then you'll eventually move on to the next open area, and often there will be a town that you can go to that has some NPCs with lots of side quests and stuff for you to do, maybe some shopping to do, and things like that. So it is a series of open areas with big story set pieces and a lot of side content. And I gotta say, another similarity to The Witcher, the side content in this game is very much worth doing. They aren't just fetch quests, and oftentimes the ones that look like they're starting out as fetch quests will quickly transform into something very different as you get into them. The side quests have usually really good voice acting, some fun stories, and just really help to flesh out the overall area and what's happening with its people. So they're definitely a worthy distraction. Visually, I think the game looks pretty nice. It's obviously not like completely modern AAA huge production budget kind of thing, but it's also not priced like one of those. So you're not going to be seeing like amazing photorealistic resolution textures or anything like that, but I think it manages to look pretty good, and I think it punches above its weight in this regard in two specific areas. One being the atmosphere. The atmosphere of exploring these areas is really solid. The atmosphere of sort of dour stoicness that happens when you're in one of the settlements is like palpable, and the atmosphere of the creepy, misty forests that may or may not be lurking with horrible spirits and or possessed corpses. And some of the other areas, like, you know, the sort of highlands and the craggy areas, or the swamps, a lot of these places have really good atmosphere. And I think that what the game lacks in, you know, like photorealism and stuff like that, it more than makes up for in terms of the way that its direction, in terms of art and sound, comes together to create these effective vibes that you're going to be getting as you explore. Some of my favorite areas have actually been the various cemeteries, because they tend to have a sort of a creepy, tense air around them with lots of well-done fog placement and some good lighting and shadows that helps to make them, you know, spooky. And the other thing that I mentioned that I think punches above its weight a little bit are the animations. The animation quality in this game is really good. Not the facial animation, but the physical character animations, the movement, the combat, the shimmying and everything. There's just little touches about the way that characters hold weapons and use tools and move around the environment that just looks really nice. And this also helps with the conversations and things, with characters often emoting pretty well with their bodies. So it makes up for a lack of really high quality facial animation by having really nice detailed body animations instead. There's often just a little bit of an extra mile gone to when it comes to certain methods of like traversal and other combat animations and things that make them just kind of charming. Like, you know how almost every third-person game ever is going to have those sections where you have to shimmy in between like a narrow wall? There's going to be like a little narrow opening in a wall and you're going to have to suck it in and shimmy through it real slow. Pretty much every game ever like this has those sections, and this game is no exception. It does have those too, but it makes them do some extra stuff. Rather than just shimmying slowly in a straight line like Dead Space style, you actually have to turn corners and duck under craggy outcroppings and hop over rocks and stuff like that. And it's a little touch, but it adds a little bit of extra charm to those sorts of animations that we see a lot of in games like this. You know, third-person games that do that are everywhere, but I usually don't see it done quite like this when it comes to having these animations be just a little bit extra detailed or have a little bit of extra variety to them, little things like that that make exploration have, I guess you could say it enhances the atmosphere of exploration that I talked about earlier. It sort of goes together because you feel more in line with the character, more a part of this world, when you have little touches like that that help you get lost in the setting. Combat is not bad. It is a relatively simple affair that gets more complex once you go through the story and unlock some more powers and stuff, because at any time you can press triangle to swap in between Red and Antea. And when you are Antea, you see things a little bit differently due to the fact that she's dead, and you will see hidden things, and this allows you to uncover hidden things for Red to use as clues and investigations and stuff like that. And you also find lots of hidden loot around the place that you can reveal with her. They each have their own gauges as well. Red has just a traditional health gauge, and if it depletes, then you're out and got to reload. But when you switch to Antea, you instead get this blue spirit gauge, and it also depletes from taking damage, but it depletes when you do almost anything as well. Pretty much all actions as a ghost will deplete this gauge in combat. And if it runs out, then you simply demanifest and go back to Red forcibly. So you can use it almost like an extra life in certain areas, allowing you to soak up a bunch of damage with her, and then switch back to Red, who is more fragile. And you rebuild this spirit gauge by doing damage with Red. You have a light attack combo as well as a heavy attack combo that can be charged in each of its stages and is quite powerful. You also eventually will get a gun. It's obviously a musket kind of weapon, so it's slow, but it is quite powerful. Most spirits will also have a weak spot of some kind, like a headshot kind of effect that allows you to do a bunch of extra crit damage if you hit them here with the gun. Doing damage will also build up the banishment gauge, in which it's full. You can tap X to banish an enemy in front of you. It's a single target attack, but it's like massively powerful. To like really hard enemies like bosses and elites and stuff like that, it'll do a big chunk of damage to them. But to most other enemies that are around your level, it will instantly kill them. Since most of what you're fighting are ghosts, you also have to worry about possession. The ghosts can possess bodies around the place, like dead wolves or dead humans, and raise them up to fight you. And this does act as an extra health gauge. You have to actually deplete the physical health gauge of the body they're possessing, which will destroy it, and then kick out the spirit, and then you have to deplete the spirit's health gauge separately to finally destroy it. And if you wait long enough, it can repossess something else if there's something else in the area. One feature that I quite like is you have this sort of compass-like effect around you whenever you're in combat. It'll point towards any enemies with a white arrow, so it's a non-intrusive way to show you that you're surrounded by things and make sure that their attacks don't just come out of nowhere, which I do appreciate in any third-person game. It's especially helpful here because this is a third-person game where the camera is pretty close to your character. It's a little bit over the shoulder. It's not quite like Resident Evil 4 close, but it's closer than usual. And this compass will also flash different colors depending on what an enemy is doing. So if it's white, that just means that there's something standing there. If it's red, then they're actively prepping an attack, so you need to get out of the way. And if it's green, then that particular enemy is going to possess something, and you should probably change whatever you're doing to pursue them immediately. You'll also eventually unlock some more advanced stuff to do, usually with Antea as you go through the story, like webbing enemies up to freeze them in place, or performing a sort of blink strike, or even charging up this big AoE blast wave attack that's also used to destroy like stones and stuff blocking your path. All of these active skills are called manifestations, and there's actually a stat that increases their power directly. There are several stats in the game, and you mostly increase them by equipping better gear. You can also block and parry, which becomes very important, and there's also the perfect switch mechanic, which is pretty cool. As you go through the skill trees, you will unlock the ability to perfect switch at certain times. Basically, after you meet the criteria for it, your hand will flash green for just a second, and if you press the switch button right at that moment, then you will switch to Antea and do some sort of powerful attack follow-up. They're really strong and useful to have, and these can be things like right after you dash forward, or right after you block an attack, or right after the third hit in a combo, things like that. So they make you apply a little bit of extra strategy, and I think that, especially when it comes to bosses and elites, this game's combat does shine in terms of the amount of options that it gives you. It's a relatively simple combat system, but it has enough moving parts to be interesting. However, where the game really shines is in its investigation gameplay. So at various points in the story, and for a lot of the side cases, in fact there's a specific type of blue quest marker that is a haunting, something that involves a ghost for you to solve. In these areas, you will be tasked to figure out what's going on, find a tie, which is an object that is sort of cursed or bound to by the ghost and is keeping them here, and then figure out who they're haunting and why, and then decide what to do with this ghost and or the person they're haunting to solve the problem. So you'll often be given various large areas to explore and then told, in this general area there are clues, go find them. And then you've got to use yourself and Antea to uncover the various clues and figure out what's going on. And once you find enough of the clues, you'll come to various conclusions that will be marked down in your journal and help you figure out what the motivations and agendas are for each of the involved parties, dead or alive. And then once you figure out enough of these conclusions and actually mark all of them down for each character, then you'll be able to bring closure with a capital C. And closure is the end of one of these quests, and this is where you make the big decision as to what to actually do. And this is where the moral choice system comes in. You have 3 different options whenever it's time to bring closure. 1, you can ascend the ghost, which is a sort of gentle ascension that is pleasant for them, and it seems to not necessarily be permanent if that ghost is particularly malevolent, but it's never explained exactly why this is or if it is permanent or not. It's just something that you can choose to do. You can also choose to banish a ghost, which is much more violent and is implied to maybe deny them an afterlife, or at least send them somewhere other than a traditional afterlife in a way that might not be pleasant for them, but it's not, again, it's ambiguous, deliberately so. You're not entirely sure where you're sending them. And both of these will solve the haunting problem once you have got all the clues and evidence together and understand fully what's going on. However, you can also choose to blame the living person, which will result in you basically sucking the soul out of them, and will kill them on the spot when you do it. And this is sort of a power that Banishers have, because if they feel that the ghost is not the one at fault, if the ghost was the one that was wronged, they can blame the living and actually kill them as a way to solve the haunting instead. However, in-game, this is presented as a very morally ambiguous thing to do, because when you do it, you feed the soul to Antea, allowing her to get closer to resurrection. And in order to get the ending, the resurrection ending of the game, you have to sacrifice more people than you save. So basically, you will be abusing your powers as a banisher to blame people, even if you didn't necessarily need to do that, in order to requisition their souls for the revival of your wife, basically is the idea. Or, of course, you can choose to banish the ghosts instead, which is still kind of morally ambiguous, but at least doesn't kill people. So I do like that these options are not necessarily presented as good or evil, because some of the people, some of the living people that you can blame are pretty bad people. They do some really awful things, and it's not necessarily telling you that you're wrong or evil for killing them, because they may have been murderers as well. So it's very much up to you to figure out how to navigate this landscape, and this makes for an interesting kind of political landscape because, of course, this is 1695. This is just a few years after the Salem witch trials had wrapped up, so we're talking about an area of the world that is fearfully, extremely religious to a serious degree. This period of time in this area was basically to supernatural happenings as the Red Scare was to communism. That's basically what it is. This was a time when everyone was twitching at the mention of something that could be construed as the devil and waiting to blame everyone else for all of the world's ills. So you're sort of in this fiery area where everyone is constantly looking for a way to blame their problems on something supernatural or something evil or demonic in nature. And as someone who actually can see ghosts and can actually deal with ghosts permanently, you're having to navigate this landscape and solve problems to people's satisfaction, but because you work with the supernatural, people often instinctively do not trust you. As for extra mechanics, there are some light puzzle elements when it comes to navigating some of the sort of dungeon-like areas. There are often a lot of areas that you can't just walk to, and you will need to do some environmental puzzling to solve in order to get there. And you'll also find that there's a crafting system, and this is because, well, you don't actually make things per se, you improve what you have. Basically, all of your gear, your weapon, your rings and trinkets, and even your healing potions and stuff, you can buy and find various new ones of those throughout the world. And you can also spend a bunch of the various resources that you find to improve them over several tiers of rarity. I think the itemization in this game is actually pretty good. The items tend to have really substantial effects rather than just being stat sticks, which I appreciate. Pretty much every item has some sort of passive effect aside from only its stats. And I also like how a lot of the weapons and armor sets look. They also remind me of the Witcher games in terms of their overall design. The weapons are cool because Banishers use sort of a blade and a torch, but the torch is like a self-striking torch, and it also has a handle more like a weapon than a tool. And also the armor sets look pretty cool too, so both the weapons and armors tend to look really neat, and there's a good variety of various different pieces of gear for you to find and make builds around. And since all of them are upgradable to the same relic rarity, that means that theoretically everything in this game is viable. You can keep upgrading whatever you want, so if you really like the look of something, then you can upgrade it and probably keep it for the whole game, I would think. You could also say that this game has technically some light Metroidvania elements, because you'll often come across some parts of the world that are blocked off by things you can't interact with yet, and you gotta remember that they're there, and then come back later when you get the powers that actually unlock them. The way that the powers work is whenever you complete one of the big story important haunting cases, Antea will absorb the tie once the associated ghost is dealt with, and by doing this she will unlock a new power and also a new skill tree. Every power is its own skill tree, and you will earn skill points by leveling up and completing quests, especially side quests and stuff, to spend on this tree. And actually the skill trees get bigger as you go through the game, which is interesting. The first couple that you'll gain access to are relatively small and only have a small smattering of skills to buy, but as you get more skills you'll notice that they get more expansive as you go. There are red skills, which take skill points for red, and then there are the blue skills that take essence points from Antea, and you mostly get those by solving hauntings. So overall, I think Banishers is a pretty solid game. It's definitely reminiscent of like the first Witcher in terms of its overall structure and feel, and I think that's a wonderful thing because there aren't a lot of games that feel like that. I like the historical setting. I think it's emulated pretty well and in an interesting way that deals with a lot of supernatural stuff, which would have been relevant in the minds of the people at the time. And there's a pretty good story here to be told. A lot of these side quests are pretty memorable, actually. They're fun, and the decisions you make actually have a fair amount of impact. And I really, really like the voice acting of the two main characters. I love their bickering that they do and stuff. I love the fact that she acts almost like a kind of internal monologue, helping to describe things, because of course most of the people in the game can't see her, so she can talk to you while you're conversing with them and comment on what they're saying. And also they tend to talk back and forth a lot just as you're exploring or doing various story things. So I think they have some really good sort of chemistry between them. I think the voice acting between them is quite high quality for both, and I think that their comments and conversations as you go through the game add a lot to the experience. So my overall view on Banishers is that it's a solid RPG that has some fun investigation and exploration to be done, and a pretty fun story to tell in a neat setting. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for the game so that you can go and check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.